Bear came to say goodbye to his owner, noticed something shocking and alerted the doctor. The steady beep of medical monitors echoed through the sterile hospital corridor as Dr. Evelyn Carter made an unusual exception to hospital policy. Walking beside her was the most unexpected visitor she'd ever allowed into the palliative care unit, a massive brown bear named Bruno, led carefully by an animal handler. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Dr. Carter muttered, checking her watch. The bear's presence had already drawn bewildered stares from the hospital staff, but something in Henry Morrison's pleading eyes when he made his final request had moved her. After 40 years of medical practice, she'd learned that sometimes breaking protocol was worth it, especially when time was running out. Bruno walked with surprising gentleness for his size, his claws clicking softly against the linoleum floor. Despite his trained demeanor, there was an undeniable tension in his movements, as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. The handler had assured Dr. Carter that Bruno was well trained and had formed an extraordinary bond with Henry over the past 15 years, but she still held her breath as they approached room 407. Inside, Henry Morrison lay propped up against white hospital pillows, his once robust frame now frail and diminished. His adopted son, Lucas, sat in a chair by the window, his shoulders tight with exhaustion from weeks of hospital vigils. The tension between father and son was palpable, a lifetime of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Carter announced softly, "your special visitor is here." Henry's eyes, clouded with medication and illness, suddenly brightened. His weathered hand trembled as he lifted it slightly off the bed, reaching toward the door. Bruno entered, and the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of going directly to Henry's bedside as expected, Bruno's nose twitched, and he began systematically sniffing the air. His powerful sense of smell had caught something that made him pause. The bear's behavior shifted from gentle companion to focused investigator. "Is everything all right?" Lucas asked, standing up, his voice tight with concern. Bruno continued his inspection, moving deliberately around the room until he stopped at Henry's bedside table. His attention fixed on a small wooden box, intricately carved with worn edges that spoke of years of handling. The bear's reaction was impossible to ignore. He kept nudging the air around it, letting out soft, insistent sounds. Henry's reaction was equally startling. Despite his weakness, he became agitated, his heart monitor picking up speed. With trembling fingers, he pointed at the box, his eyes suddenly filled with an urgency that seemed to draw on his last reserves of strength. "Dad?" Lucas moved closer, confusion etched on his face. "What is it? What's in the box?" But Henry couldn't speak. Weeks of illness had robbed him of his voice, leaving him with only desperate gestures and pleading looks. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her medical instincts warring with her curiosity. "Mr. Morrison, try to stay calm. Do you want us to open the box?" A weak but determined nod. Lucas reached for the box, but to everyone's astonishment, Bruno let out a low growl, not threatening, but clearly disapproving. The bear's reaction caused Lucas to step back, hurt and confusion flickering across his face. It was a subtle reminder of the distance that had always existed between him and his adopted father, a distance that seemed to widen even now, in what could be their final moments together. Dr. Carter observed the scene with growing intrigue. In her years of medical practice, she'd witnessed many family dynamics, but this was different. The bear's behavior, Henry's desperate gestures, Lucas's hurt expression, they all pointed to something deeper, something hidden. "The box appears to be locked," she noted, examining it closely. A small brass keyhole gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Henry's fingers fumbled with his hospital gown, pointing weakly to a thin chain around his neck. Understanding dawned on Dr. Carter's face. With gentle hands, she helped him lift the chain, revealing a small key that had rested against his heart all this time. Lucas watched the scene unfold with growing unease. "I've never seen that box before," he said quietly. "All these years living in the same house, and I never knew it existed." The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, another secret, Another reminder of the walls his father had built around himself. Bruno's attention remained fixed on the box, his behavior growing more restless. The animal handler, who had remained quietly by the door, spoke up for the first time. "I've never seen him act quite like this. It's as if he recognizes something." Dr. Carter held the key, looking at Henry for final confirmation. His eyes, though tired, held a mix of fear and determination. Whatever was in this box, it had been important enough for him to keep it close during his final days. Important enough to cause this strange reaction in Bruno. Important enough to potentially change everything. As she inserted the key into the lock, the small click seemed to echo through the room. Nobody spoke. Even the hospital monitor seemed to fade into the background. Bruno's massive form stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the box as if it held answers to questions nobody had thought to ask. The lid creaked open, revealing its contents, a stack of yellowed letters, bound together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was brittle with age, the handwriting on the exposed envelope elegant but time-worn. The name on the top envelope made everyone in the room pause. "Daniel." Lucas stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Who's Daniel?" The answer to that question would unravel a lifetime of secrets, forever changing the lives of everyone in that hospital room. But for now, they could only watch as Bruno gently nosed the letters, and Henry's tears began to fall. Dr. Carter carefully untied the faded blue ribbon, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. The letters, brittle with age, rustled like autumn leaves as she lifted the first envelope. Bruno's massive form remained unnaturally still, his dark eyes fixed on the yellowed paper as if he could read the secrets they held. "Should I?" Dr. Carter looked at Henry, who managed a weak nod, his eyes never leaving the bundle of letters. Lucas stood frozen, his hands gripping the back of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The room felt charged with an electric tension that made even breathing seem loud. The first letter was dated 25 years ago. Dr. Carter's clear voice broke the silence as she began to read. Asterisk, dearest Daniel, asterisk. Asterisk, I wonder if I'll ever have the courage to send these letters. Each time I see a child in the park or hear a young boy's laughter, my heart aches knowing you're out there somewhere. Your mother, Margaret, was right. I am a coward. But perhaps someday, when you're old enough to understand, I can explain why I made the choices I did. Asterisk. Today, you would be 5 years old. Lucas's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. 5? He whispered, quickly calculating in his head. That would make him my older brother? The word brother seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implications. Henry's monitors beeped faster as tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. Bruno, sensing his distress, moved closer to the bed, but his eyes never left the letters. The bear's behavior continued to be peculiar, almost as if he recognized something about them beyond their physical presence. Dr. Carter selected another letter, this one dated a few years later. Asterisk, dear Daniel, asterisk. Asterisk, I saw a boy today who must have been about your age. He was playing with a small bear cub at the Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary, a rescue operation your grandmother would never approve of me running. The bear's mother had been killed by poachers, and something about his lost, lonely eyes reminded me of how I imagine yours might look. I named him Bruno. Asterisk. Asterisk, I wonder if you would love animals as much as I do. If you inherited that from me, along with what Margaret always called the Morrison stubborn streak. Asterisk. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Lucas turned to stare at Bruno, who met his gaze with knowing eyes. The bear wasn't just Henry's pet. He was a living link to the son he'd never claimed. All this time, Lucas's voice cracked. All these years of feeling like I wasn't enough, like I could never quite measure up to some invisible standard. And now I find out there was another son? When you gave up? The hurt in his voice was raw, decades of feeling second best crystallizing in this moment of revelation. Henry tried to speak, his lips moving soundlessly, his hand reaching toward Lucas. But his adopted son stepped back, the betrayal evident in every line of his body. I thought the reason you were always so distant, so reserved, was because of something I did. Because I wasn't good enough. But it was guilt, wasn't it? Guilt over him. Dr. Carter pulled out another letter, this one water-stained as if tears had fallen on it during its writing. Asterisk my son, asterisk. Asterisk today I signed the papers to adopt a boy named Lucas. He's 8 years old, with your mother's kind eyes and gentle spirit. My own mother, your grandmother, finally got her wish, a Morrison heir that meets her social standards. The irony of it burns like acid in my throat. She'll never know that her first grandson, her true heir, is out there somewhere, denied his birthright because of her prejudices. Asterisk. Asterisk I look at Lucas and see both my greatest joy and my deepest shame. Joy because he deserves a father's love, and shame because I failed to give that same love to you. How does a man balance such opposing truths in his heart? Asterisk. Lucas sank into his chair, his anger giving way to a more complex emotion. You loved me, he said softly, but you were haunted by him. It wasn't quite a question, but Henry nodded, tears streaming down his face. Bruno suddenly moved, pushing his nose against the box until another letter fell out, one that had been hidden beneath the others. The paper was newer, the ink less faded. Dr. Carter picked it up with trembling fingers, noting the date was just 6 months ago. Asterisk my firstborn son, asterisk. Asterisk the doctors say I don't have much time left. I've hired private investigators, searched every database, but finding you seems beyond my reach. Your mother Margaret's family moved so many times, covered their tracks so well. Perhaps they were right to protect you from me and my weakness. Asterisk. Asterisk Bruno is the only one who remembers you. Sometimes I catch him staring at the old sanctuary where he first came to us, where you once played with him as a cub, though you never knew he would become part of your father's life. He was meant to be a sign, a living reminder of my promise to find you someday. Asterisk. Asterisk Lucas deserves to know the truth about his brother. About why his father could never fully open his heart. The weight of this secret has created a wall between us that I never meant to build. Asterisk. The letter ended abruptly, as if Henry had been too overwhelmed to continue. Dr. Carter looked up to find both Henry and Lucas weeping silently, while Bruno moved between them, gently nudging each one as if trying to bridge the gap that had grown so wide over the years. The brother I never knew I had, Lucas whispered, and the father I never fully understood. He stood up slowly, moving to Henry's bedside. All this time, I thought it was something wrong with me. But you were carrying this alone, weren't you? This guilt, this regret, this secret. Henry managed to lift his hand, and this time, Lucas took it. The touch seemed to break something open in the room, a dam of unspoken words and hidden pain finally beginning to crack. Dr. Carter gathered the letters carefully, but Bruno's attention had shifted to the box again. There, tucked in a hidden compartment, was one final item, a small, faded photograph of a woman holding a baby, and behind them, the sign of the Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary. On the back, in careful handwriting, was written, Margaret and Daniel, Summer 1999. The pieces were falling into place, but time was running out. Henry's breathing had become more labored, his grip on Lucas's hand weakening. Whatever was to be done about these revelations would need to happen quickly. Bruno let out a soft whine, and for the first time, Lucas recognized it for what it was, not just an animal's concern, but the sound of someone who remembered, who knew, who could perhaps lead them to the missing piece of their family puzzle. If only they knew where to look. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hospital window, Dr. Carter began piecing together the story hidden within the remaining letters. Each envelope revealed another layer of Henry's past, painting a picture of love, loss, and the crushing weight of societal expectations that had shaped 3 generations of lives. There's something else here, Dr. Carter said, pulling out a small leather-bound diary that had been concealed beneath the last batch of letters. It looks like it belonged to Margaret. Bruno's reaction was immediate. He rose from his position near Henry's bed and moved closer to Dr. Carter, his nose twitching at the scent of the old leather. Henry's monitor showed a spike in his heart rate, his eyes fixed on the diary with a mixture of fear and longing. Dr. Carter opened the diary carefully, its pages brittle with age. She began to read. April 15, 1999. Today, I told Henry I was pregnant. I've never seen such joy and terror battle across someone's face before. He held me close, promised we would figure it out together. But I saw the fear in his eyes when he mentioned his mother. The great Victoria Morrison, with her old money and even older prejudices. What chance does our love have against generations of carefully maintained social barriers? Lucas leaned forward, absorbing every word. The mother he'd never known about was coming to life through these pages, her voice clear and strong despite the years that had passed. June 3, 1999. Henry took me to his wildlife sanctuary today. It's his secret rebellion against his family's expectations, using his trust fund to save animals instead of investing in the family's real estate empire. We watched a mother bear with her cub, and Henry said our child would grow up surrounded by this kind of pure, unconditional love. I want to believe him, Bruno made a soft sound, and Henry's hand twitched on the blanket, as if reaching for something, or someone, long gone. August 20th, 1999. Victoria found out about the pregnancy. Her reaction was exactly what we feared. She threatened to cut Henry off completely, not just from the money, but from his beloved sanctuary. All the animals would be sold off or euthanized. How can she be so cruel? Henry begged her to understand, but she gave him an ultimatum: end things with me, or watch everything he's built be destroyed. I saw something break in him today. The weight of his family name, the responsibility to the animals he's sworn to protect, the impossible choice between his child and his life's work. I won't let him make that choice. I won't be the reason those innocent creatures suffer. Our baby deserves better than a father crushed by guilt and regret. Dr. Carter paused, noticing Henry's tears flowing freely now. Lucas had moved closer to his father's bed, his own anger giving way to understanding. The story was far more complex than any of them had imagined. September 15, 1999. I left today, before Henry could stop me. My sister in Colorado will help me raise the baby. Henry will never know where we've gone. It's better this way. The sanctuary will survive, and our child won't grow up watching their father torn between two worlds. But I left something behind, the baby's first teddy bear at the sanctuary. A small cub, rescued just last week. Henry named him Bruno. Perhaps someday, if fate is kind, that bear will be a bridge between father and son. The revelation hit Lucas like a physical blow. Bruno wasn't just any rescued cub. He whispered. He was meant to be Daniel's first gift from his father. Henry managed to nod weakly, his hand reaching out to touch Bruno's fur. The bear had been more than a pet, more than even a reminder. He had been a living promise, a guardian of the secret Henry had carried for 25 years. But the diary held one more surprise. Tucked into its final pages was a letter dated just 2 years ago, written in an unfamiliar hand. Dear Mr. Morrison. My name is Sarah Chin. I was Margaret's hospice nurse in her final days. She made me promise to send this letter after her passing, along with her diary. She wanted you to know that she never regretted giving you your freedom, but she did regret not telling Daniel the truth about his father. Daniel grew up to be everything she hoped, kind, strong, and with your love for helping others. He's a wildlife veterinarian now, working at a sanctuary in Oregon. Margaret always said he had your gift with animals. She kept every newspaper clipping about your sanctuary, every article about your work. In her final hours, she admitted that leaving the bear cub behind wasn't just about leaving a memento. It was her way of keeping a connection, hoping that someday, somehow, that connection might lead you back to your son. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Bruno had settled between Henry and Lucas, his massive head resting gently on the bed. The bear had been more than just a pet or a reminder. He had been a bridge, waiting all these years to connect a broken family. Lucas stood up suddenly, his face set with determination. We have to find him, he said. Daniel. He's out there, working with animals just like you, Dad. Just like both his parents. Dr. Carter looked at the letter again. A wildlife veterinarian in Oregon, that's something we can work with. But Henry's condition. She glanced at the monitors, her medical training telling her what they all feared. Time was running out. Henry's hand trembled as he reached for the diary, turning to its last page with what little strength he had left. There, in Margaret's handwriting, was one final note. Asterisk, my dearest Henry, if you're reading this, know that I forgave you long ago. The choice I made was mine, and I made it out of love for you, for our son, and for all the creatures you fought so hard to protect. Daniel deserves to know his father's heart. Find him. Tell him the story of the bear cub who was meant to be his first gift. Tell him about the sanctuary that cost you so much but saved so many. Tell him that love sometimes means making impossible choices. Asterisk. Bruno lifted his head, letting out a soft whine that seemed to echo through the room. He had been patient for 25 years, carrying the weight of the secret. Now, finally, he might be able to complete the task Margaret had entrusted to him so long ago, bringing father and son together one last time. The next few hours in room 407 became a frantic race between hope and time. Dr. Carter had pulled every string she could, calling colleagues in Oregon while Lucas scoured the internet for wildlife sanctuaries. Bruno remained vigilant by Henry's bedside, occasionally lifting his head at the mention of certain locations, as if he too was participating in the search. I think I found something, Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency. There's a Dr. Daniel Chin working at the Pacific Wildlife Center in Portland. Chin, that was Sarah's last name, Margaret's nurse. Could he have taken her name? Dr. Carter looked up from her phone, her expression cautiously optimistic. It would make sense. Margaret might have wanted to protect him from Victoria's influence. She glanced at Henry, whose breathing had become more labored over the past hour. The monitors told a story she'd seen too many times before. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Bruno's behavior changed. He'd been dozing lightly, but at the mention of the Pacific Wildlife Center, his head shot up, eyes alert. He moved to Lucas's laptop, nosing at the screen where a photo showed the sanctuary's entrance, a wooden arch remarkably similar to the one in the old photograph from Margaret's diary. Dad? Lucas turned the laptop so Henry could see. Is this it? Is this where you and Margaret used to go? Henry's eyes widened in recognition. His hand trembled as he reached toward the screen, touching the image of a familiar bear carved into the arch, the same design he'd used for his own sanctuary's logo decades ago. He nodded weakly, tears forming in his eyes. Dr. Carter was already dialing the number listed on the website. The waiting seemed endless as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a receptionist answered. Pacific Wildlife Center, how can I help you? This is Dr. Evelyn Carter from Massachusetts General Hospital. I need to speak with Dr. Daniel Chin immediately. It's an emergency regarding his biological father. The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like eternity. I'm sorry, the receptionist finally said. Dr. Chin is in surgery with an injured mountain lion. He can't be disturbed. Lucas grabbed the phone. Please, you don't understand. His father is dying. We just discovered there are letters, a diary, a whole history he needs to know about. The bear, Bruno, he was meant to be Daniel's. Please. Something in Lucas's desperate plea must have reached through the professional barrier. Surgery should be finished in an hour, the receptionist said softly. I'll make sure he gets the message immediately after. But an hour might be too long. Henry's condition had deteriorated rapidly since the discovery of the letters. The night nurse had already called for additional medication to help ease his discomfort. Bruno sensed the change, growing increasingly restless, moving between Henry and the door as if trying to urge them to hurry. Lucas paced the room, decades of complicated emotions playing across his face. All these years, he muttered. I thought you were distant because of me. But you were carrying this weight alone. Protecting the sanctuary, protecting me from Victoria's prejudices, protecting Daniel from her influence. He stopped at his father's bedside. You tried to make up for it by saving every animal you could, didn't you? Henry managed a small nod, his eyes full of unspoken words. Dr. Carter checked his vitals again, her expression grave. We need to consider. She began gently, but was interrupted by her phone ringing. The caller ID showed an Oregon area code. This is Daniel Chin, a voice said without preamble. I just got out of surgery. What's this about my biological father? Dr. Carter put the phone on speaker. Dr. Chin, your father is Henry Morrison. He's been searching for you for years. He's here with your brother Lucas and... She paused. And Bruno. Bruno? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. The bear cub from the sanctuary? The one in the photo with my mother? The same, Lucas answered. He recognized your scent on the letters. He's been waiting all these years to bring this family together. There was a long silence on the other end. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I have that photo in my office. Mom gave it to me before she died, told me the truth about why she left. I've been trying to find the courage to reach out ever since. Henry stirred on the bed, his eyes opening wide. Bruno moved closer, letting out a soft whine that carried through the phone. That sound. Daniel's breath caught. I remember that sound. The bear cub used to make it when he wanted attention. There was rustling on his end of the line, voices in the background. I'm booking a flight right now. Just tell him to hold on. Tell him I want to hear the whole story from him. But the monitors were telling a different story. Henry's vitals were dropping steadily. Dr. Carter met Lucas's eyes, both knowing what they didn't want to say aloud. Daniel, Lucas said urgently, can you do a video call? Right now? Moments later, Daniel's face appeared on Lucas's laptop screen, a man in his mid-30s, wearing surgical scrubs, with Henry's eyes and Margaret's gentle expression. Bruno immediately went to the screen, sniffing and pawing gently at the image, recognizing something that transcended the years and distance. Oh my God! Daniel whispered, taking in the scene, Henry in the hospital bed, Bruno's obvious recognition, Lucas's tear-streaked face. All this time, all these years. Henry rallied slightly at the sight of his firstborn son, his hand reaching toward the screen. Bruno gently helped support his arm, showing an almost human understanding of the moment's importance. The earliest flight I can get is in 3 hours, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Please just hold on. I have so many questions, so much I want to know. Dr. Carter watched the monitors with growing concern. 3 hours might as well be 3 years. Unless... I have an idea, she said suddenly. Daniel, what if we could bring your father to you? The hospital has a medical transport helicopter. I could pull some strings, make it happen within the hour. He's stable enough for the flight, and Bruno. She looked at the bear thoughtfully. Well, we've already broken every protocol today. What's one more? The hope that bloomed on both brothers' faces was answer enough. But they all knew it would be a race against time, and time had never been on this family's side. The helicopter blades cut through the night sky, their rhythmic thrum matching Henry's labored heartbeat. Dr. Carter had pulled off what seemed impossible, arranging an emergency medical transport to Oregon, complete with special clearance for Bruno. The bear lay quietly in the back of the helicopter, somehow understanding the gravity of their mission. Lucas sat beside his father, holding his hand, while watching the darkness rush past outside. The past 12 hours had transformed his world completely. He'd gained a brother, lost and found his father in new ways, and was now racing across the country in a desperate bid for closure. We're about 30 minutes out from Portland, the pilot announced through their headsets. Dr. Chin has an ambulance waiting at the landing pad. Henry stirred at Daniel's name, his eyes flickering open. The high altitude required extra oxygen, and the mask over his face fogged with each shallow breath. Bruno lifted his head, watching his old friend with unwavering attention. Dr. Carter checked the portable monitors for the 100th time. Hold on, Mr. Morrison, she whispered. Just a little longer. Meanwhile, at the Pacific Wildlife Center, Daniel paced the empty corridors, his surgical scrubs replaced by jeans and a worn sweater. The sanctuary was technically closed for the night, but the lights blazed in welcome. Through the windows, he could see the wooden arch that had sparked recognition in Bruno hours earlier, the bear carving that had drawn him to this place years ago, though he hadn't known why at the time. "I've prepared the medical bay," his assistant Jenny said softly. "Though it's usually for injured animals, not." She trailed off, still trying to process the extraordinary events of the evening. Daniel nodded, too wound up to speak. The last few hours had been surreal. He'd gone from performing routine surgery on an injured mountain lion to discovering his biological father was not only alive but had been searching for him. And Bruno, the bear cub from his only childhood photo with his mother, had been the key to unlocking it all. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear despite the years, his mother, in her final days, telling him about the bear cub. "He was meant to be yours," she'd said. "Your father's first gift to you. I left him behind hoping someday he might lead you back to each other." The sound of helicopter blades pulled him from the memory. His heart began racing as he rushed outside, watching the aircraft descend onto the small landing pad adjacent to the sanctuary. The medical team he'd arranged was already moving forward with a gurney. As the helicopter doors opened, Daniel froze. The first thing he saw was Bruno, massive now, but with the same gentle eyes he remembered from the photograph. The bear's head turned toward him immediately, and a soft whine of recognition cut through the noise of the rotors. Then he saw Henry. His father was pale, fragile, so different from the strong man standing beside his mother in the old photo. But his eyes, Daniel recognized those eyes from his own reflection. They were fixed on him now, bright with tears and recognition. "Daniel," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible even though they'd removed the oxygen mask. His hand trembled as he reached out. Bruno moved first, breaking protocol once again to gently nose at Daniel's hand, bridging the gap between father and son. The touch broke Daniel's paralysis, and he rushed forward. "I'm here," he said, grasping his father's outstretched hand. "I'm here, Dad." The word Dad seemed to release something in Henry. Tears flowed freely down his face as the medical team transferred him to the gurney. Lucas appeared on his other side, and for a moment, both brothers stood together, united by the man between them and the bear who had brought them together. "Inside," Dr. Carter ordered gently. "He needs to be stable before." She didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. Before it was too late. The medical bay was warm and bright, surprisingly comfortable despite its intended purpose for animal patients. As they settled Henry into the bed, Bruno took up his now familiar position of guard and witness. "I searched for you," Henry managed to say, his voice stronger now that he was lying down. "Every year I would look." "I know," Daniel said. "Mom told me everything near the end. About Victoria, about the sanctuary, about the choice she made." He swallowed hard. "I was angry at first, when I found out. But then I understood. You both did what you thought was right." Lucas stood quietly, watching his brother and father together. The resemblance was striking, not just physically, but in their gentle manner, their connection to animals, their capacity for forgiveness. "You have to know," Henry said, looking between his sons. "Both of you, you were both so loved. Lucas," he turned to his younger son. "I'm sorry I couldn't be more open, couldn't explain." "I understand now," Lucas interrupted softly. "You were protecting everyone, me, Daniel, the sanctuary, even Bruno. That's what you've always done, isn't it? Protected others at your own expense." Henry's eyes filled with tears again. "I should have been stronger. Should have stood up to my mother, found a way." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Mom made her choice. She wanted you to continue your work, save those animals. And look," he gestured around at the sanctuary. "I ended up doing the same thing. It's in our blood, this need to help creatures who can't help themselves." Bruno moved then, placing himself between the brothers, his large head gently nudging their hands together. The bear had spent 25 years waiting for this moment, carrying the weight of unspoken words and untold stories. He knew, Lucas realized aloud. Somehow, all these years, he knew there was something missing. That's why he was always so restless at the old sanctuary, always watching the entrance as if waiting for someone. Waiting for you, Henry whispered to Daniel. Margaret was right, she left the perfect guardian, the perfect messenger. His voice grew weaker, his eyes starting to flutter. I just wish we had more time. Dr. Carter stepped forward, checking the monitors with a concerned expression. The brothers exchanged alarmed looks. They weren't ready, had barely begun to know each other, had so many questions still to ask. But Bruno, wise beyond human understanding, let out a soft sound that drew everyone's attention. He moved to Henry's bedside and did something unprecedented. He gently laid his head on the bed, offering his ear for one last secret, one final message that needed to be shared before it was too late. In the quiet medical bay of the Pacific Wildlife Center, time seemed to slow down. Bruno's head remained gently pressed against Henry's bed, his presence a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what was found. Henry's trembling hand reached out to stroke the bears for one last time, his eyes filled with a lifetime of memories. Your mother, Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. She always said animals could sense the truth in people's hearts. He looked at his sons, Lucas, who had lived with the weight of unspoken words, and Daniel, who had grown up carrying half of his own story. Bruno knew. All these years, he knew both of you belonged together. The bear lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes moving between the brothers. In that moment, he seemed to embody every letter written but never sent, every birthday missed, every moment of connection delayed by time and circumstance. I have something for you both, Henry said, his breath growing shorter. In the sanctuary, my sanctuary, behind the bear carving on the main gate, there's a hidden compartment. Victoria never knew. He paused, gathering strength. The deed. I changed it years ago. Put both your names. Lucas and Daniel exchanged surprised looks. Dad, Lucas started, but Henry shook his head weakly. Let me finish. The sanctuary, it was never about the Morrison name. It was about love, pure, unconditional love. The kind animals give so freely. His eyes found Daniel's. The kind your mother taught me was more important than family expectations. Dr. Carter checked the monitors, her expression grave but caring. She'd witnessed countless family moments in her career, but this one was different. This was a mending of something long broken, a healing that transcended the physical. Bruno, Henry called softly, and the bear moved closer. You did it, old friend. You kept your promise to Margaret. You brought them together. His hand found the bear's fur again. Take care of them both. As if understanding, Bruno let out a soft sound, the same gentle whine he made as a cub when Daniel had played with him all those years ago. The sound seemed to unlock something in Daniel, and tears began flowing freely down his face. I remember, he said suddenly. I remember playing with a bear cub at the sanctuary. Mom would never tell me why we stopped going. She just said sometimes love means making hard choices. He took his father's hand. I understand now. I understand everything. Lucas moved to the other side of the bed, his own tears falling. The sanctuary, it was your way of keeping a piece of both your children alive in your heart. Every animal you saved was a promise, Henry finished weakly. A promise that love, real love, finds a way. His breathing became more labored, but his eyes remained clear, moving between his sons. Bruno knew. He always knew. The bear shifted position, placing himself so both brothers could lean against him as they sat with their father. In that moment, they were no longer divided by secrets or time. They were simply a family, brought together by an extraordinary animal's patient vigilance. I need you both to know, Henry said, each word carefully chosen, that every child I couldn't save at the sanctuary, every animal I couldn't protect, they reminded me of my failures as a father. But you, his eyes found Lucas. You showed me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. His gaze shifted to Daniel. And you, You proved that love finds its own path, even when we try to deny it. The monitors began to beep more slowly, but Henry wasn't finished. With the last of his strength, he fumbled with something around his neck, a small key on a chain. The gate, at my sanctuary. He pressed the key into their joined hands. Go there, together. The bears, they need both of you. Bruno let out another soft sound, and Henry's lips curved in a slight smile. You knew, didn't you? You always knew they'd find each other. The bear's gentle eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom of his 25 years of patient waiting, all the love of a family torn apart, and now reunited. My sons! Henry's voice was barely a whisper now. My beautiful, brave sons, love each other, protect each other, the way Bruno protected our secret. His hand tightened briefly on theirs, and then relaxed. The monitors gave their final signal, but it wasn't the harsh sound of loss. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement that a long journey had finally reached its end. Bruno moved then, gently pressing his head against each brother in turn, as if passing on a sacred trust. The bear who had been meant as a gift for a 5-year-old boy had become something far more, a guardian of family bonds, a keeper of secrets, a bridge across time and loss. Through their tears, Lucas and Daniel found themselves leaning on each other, supported by Bruno's steady presence. The key in their hands seemed to glow in the soft light of dawn now creeping through the windows. We should go, Daniel said softly, after a long moment. To his sanctuary. See what he left for us. Lucas nodded, looking at Bruno. Will you show us the way, old friend? One last time? The bear's response was to move toward the door, then look back at them expectantly. Some might have called it a coincidence, but both brothers knew better. Bruno had spent 25 years preparing for this moment, waiting to complete the journey that began with a young mother's desperate choice and a father's unspoken love. As they followed Bruno out into the breaking dawn, the brothers walked shoulder to shoulder. Behind them, in the quiet medical bay, Henry Morrison's face held the peace of a man who had finally brought all his loves together: his sons, his life's work, and the extraordinary bear who had never given up on the power of patience and unconditional love. And somewhere, perhaps, Margaret was smiling, knowing that her final gift, leaving behind a bear cub who would grow up to reunite a divided family, had fulfilled its purpose in ways even she couldn't have imagined. The sun rose fully over the Pacific Wildlife Center, its light catching the carved bear on the wooden arch. Soon, two brothers would discover what their father had left them, would begin the work of healing old wounds and building new bonds. And Bruno would be there, as he had always been, watching over the family that love had torn apart and love had brought together again.